Thank you for joining us for What I Wish I Had Known, a lessons learned webinar hosted by IDEA, the International Diaspora Engagement Alliance, and Semai Consulting. My name is Sarah Youssefnajad Gallagher, and I'm the Program Officer for IDEA. This webinar is part of our Capacity Development Series, and we're fortunate and excited to partner with Semhar Araia, CEO of Semai Consulting, who's really a diaspora expert and has been working in the diaspora and development spaces for the last 15 years. As I said, she's the CEO of Semai Consulting, a trained lawyer, social entrepreneur, and faculty member at George Washington University. With a background in African affairs, humanitarian crises, diasporas, and development, Semhar has worked with over 75 diaspora organizations and provides guidance, analysis, and training to clients focused on international affairs, civic leadership, and development. She's the founder of Diaspora African Women's Network, DAWN, an organization whose mission is to support and help develop the next generation of African diaspora professional women focused on African affairs. Ms. Araia is a term member of the Council on Foreign Relations, a White House Champion of Change, and an African Union Diaspora Awardee of the Year, recognized for her diaspora engagement and civic leadership. She's a frequent guest speaker, an avid Twitter user, and you can follow her at Semhar, is her handle, and one of Foreign Policy's top 100 foreign policy women on Twitter. She has been featured in the Financial Times, BBC, Al Jazeera, The Guardian, Ventures Africa, and other media outlets. As you can see, we're very pleased to have Semhar with us speaking today. And with that, I'll turn it over to her. Welcome, Semhar.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I am really happy to sit with everyone today. Those of you who have a camera, hello, I'm waving at you. And for those of you on the phone, thank you so much for dialing in. Working with the International Diaspora Engagement Alliance has been a really phenomenal experience for me because they've provided a very necessary platform for diaspora actors, institutions, individuals, communities, really all stakeholders to connect. So thank you to IDEA for inviting me. And also I encourage you to check out their work at diasporaalliance.org and get more resources and tips from them. It's a great organization. When they asked if I was interested in doing another webinar, I jumped at the chance. And the question was, well, what should we cover? And I said, well, I think after all this time of working with different groups and learning from each other, it's pretty important to have a conversation about what we've learned, what we wish we knew, and what works with diaspora engagement and diaspora organizing. So in today's conversation, I want to take an informal approach and sharing with you some of the things I wish I knew when I started. And so for about 15, 20 minutes, I just want to share some thoughts and then open it up to questions because that's really the most important part for me. Let me begin by also sharing that in addition to starting the Diaspora African Women's Network and then launching my consulting company a year ago, I've had the opportunity to work with diaspora organizations and diaspora communities in many different ways. Prior to Dawn, I had a job on the Hill, which allowed me to meet with a wide range of constituency groups. And I saw the power and the important responsibilities that immigrant communities and multi-generational communities have in advancing domestic and international issues. I got to sit with groups from all over the world who were American or residents in the United States, who were using their time, talent, and treasure to bring up the issues that they cared about. Most of the time it had to deal with the diaspora country of origin and the relationship with the United States. But I also saw a number of nonprofit organizations doing really important work in immigrant spaces on the domestic side. And I saw that there was this really bright opportunity and potential, and probably more importantly, most importantly, an urgent need for these voices to be amplified. So I also have learned as a member of a diaspora myself, my family is Eritrean. I am the daughter of Eritrean immigrant parents, first one to be born in the United States. Carrying that mantle of going between two cultures and two communities is actually very important, and it's special. It's it's a huge responsibility. Sometimes it feels like a burden because you're going in between, but then you realize that being in between is actually the asset. And that is where, as a daughter of immigrants, as a member of the Eritrean diaspora, as a working professional with different communities, I saw all of these things coming together. And so really what I wish I had known started back then. When I started Dawn and when I began venturing into diaspora organizing, both within the Eritrean community and at a Pan-African level, I was really working from a place of love, but also really deep angst and frustration at injustices. And that frustration and anger over injustice, it still resides with me, but I deal with it differently. At the time, it really shaped and drove my energy, which means that that momentum and that excitement and that desire for change, it came from a sense of we deserve better and we are worth it and we matter. And in fact, when we used to organize for the Obama campaign, I started African Diaspora for Obama. One of our slogans was, yes, we can, because yes, we matter. And that was around the time that I started to realize understanding injustices, it does require a level of anger, because you have to be angry in order to right the wrong. But you have to then take it further and look at it from a solutions-oriented space. And that requires stamina, because a solution doesn't happen overnight. And I learned how to change my anger into optimism and focus on the possibilities and the solutions. It can be a very toxic space staying in a place of anger. And especially as a member of the diaspora, we have many reasons to understand and feel the pain behind the injustice. But we also have a lot of privilege and a lot of support to get past that, to get through it and get past it. And I think that's a critical first step that you have to take in diaspora organizing, is working on the injustice from a place of solutions. And that means so much long-term work. So I think that's when my diaspora work started to change. I found myself, some days I'd just be tired and beaten up. And I didn't like the person I was becoming. I didn't like how acutely aware I was of everything that's wrong. And I wondered, why am I not acutely aware of everything that's right? And why am I not showing people what's right and showing people how it should be? And so, the organizing during the campaign was really a teachable space. I started with Eritreans for Obama and worked for my community, but we opened it up and reached out. And there were already many other existing diaspora efforts, African diaspora efforts, to support then presidential candidate Barack Obama, but we didn't know each other. And so we worked with a number of organizations that had been doing groundwork for months. And I learned that we have a lot more in common as members of the African diaspora and members of the diaspora. We have a lot more in common than we do separately. So through African Diaspora Organizing, African Diaspora for Obama, I learned that it also helps to work from a place of commonality, and that we are each unique in our own ways. We are each experiencing different journeys as members of diaspora communities, but that we actually have a lot of similarity in those journeys. I learned that we are actually stronger together, and developing alliances has to start with ourselves. As a Pan-African and as a human being, that is also a critical component to organizing. Now, the third point I want to make is around understanding the power of your service. When you organize in diaspora communities, it comes often than not from a place of service. Whether it's a nonprofit or a business, you are looking to help your people, help your community, and help your countries of origin and your countries that you've embraced. And in that aim to serve, you have to first do the work of understanding the value of your work. I wish I knew how valuable my work was. I wish I knew that each of us have tremendous value and worth that deserves to be recognized. Now, as an organizer, you inherently recognize the value of everyone around you, but it's also really important that you recognize the value of yourself. And that's something I didn't really give enough thought to. I worked tirelessly. I burned candles at both ends sometimes. And I loved it. I don't regret it, but I just wish that I had a better sense of self-worth and self-care as a member of the diaspora. Why do I say this? Well, for someone who's born outside of their country of origin, you have a completely different experience than an immigrant, than someone who still lives there. And I felt that because I had not only a different experience, but that I wasn't dealing with the same challenges or similar challenges of lack of economic opportunity or poverty or conflict and war, because my life in the United States was already considered a place of privilege, that I have no need to complain. What is there for me to complain about? Just work. Just work, 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 do, build, support, all of that. And there's some truth to that. When you work from a place of privilege, as many of us in the United States are, you're in a place of privilege because you have a different life than the life that your community and your parents and your previous generations have had. When you work from a place of privilege, sometimes you fool yourself into thinking that you don't need anything, but you do. And you actually need to do self-care better because you are stretching yourself between the life that you have for yourself and the life that you have for your community and the life that you envision with your country of origin. So you are now putting yourself in multiple spaces as a leader, as an organizer, as an entrepreneur. And the only way that that impact can be felt is if you have a sense of value over your time, your talent, and your treasure. And that's the whole package of time, talent, and treasure. Today we call that philanthropy, but this is the whole components of giving. If you don't have money, you give your time. If you don't have time, you give your skills. And if you have money, then you give that treasure. And I just think that diaspora organizing isn't an extracurricular activity. It is a lifestyle, it is a commitment, and it's a culture. And when you enter into that, you have to factor in how to take care of yourself with your time, your talent, and your treasure. So with time, I wish I knew how much time it takes to build from the ground up. And I don't mean a year, 2 years. I mean the 24 hours in a day that you have become incredibly valuable. You have to make a decision over whether you're going out or whether you're going to the community center or whether you're going to eat dinner at 7 or at 11. Every waking minute of your day becomes incredibly valuable. And so there were nights that I would work till 4 or 5 in the morning. This is when I had energy and when I still thought I was an Energizer bunny. I really just looked at time as a constant. But what I've learned now is you have to look at those 24 hours and be realistic about your self-care and be realistic about your priorities. Your family is huge. First of all, your family is probably a huge source of support for many of you, but they also deserve your time because of the support they're giving you. And over the years, I've been lucky enough to have a loving family that knew I was going to do this come hell or high water, and that they couldn't fight it. And instead of trying to dismiss it or try to change my opinion, they embraced me. But in my 20s, I just went. And we do that as young people. And I grew up in that space. As an Eritrean American, I grew up in a diaspora organizing culture. But, life is now. And life happens throughout the day, and you can't afford to miss it, even when you're serving your community. So with time, enjoy it. And if you are organizing in something you not only believe is right, but if you're organizing around something you love, time flies. So the best thing you can do is be cognizant of your value and how you're spending your time, and to appreciate the spaces that are for you. Meaning for me, that was my family. So, you know, I pretty much go home all the time now. My family's in Minneapolis because that is something you can't get back. The second thing is about talent. Now, I love to learn. I love learning new skills. I love tech. I have a curious mind, and I enjoy that process. So when I launched Dawn, I built it with complete curiosity. How do you build a network? Who am I trying to serve? And what do I want to change? And my mind was just digging. And I really love that. But what I wish I knew, and I think it's more available now than it was 10 years ago. What I wish I knew is there's a whole world out there waiting to help you. And they may not be from your diaspora community, but man, oh man, they have talents and skills that they want to give. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about volunteers and supporters who would be there for you if you asked. So instead of insisting that you do it all, or that 3 of you do it and you're all from your one diaspora community, I wish I knew how to seek out the talents that I didn't have and rely on people whom I would not have expected to rely on. People that weren't of my diaspora community, people that weren't diaspora African women. right here. I was so insistent on it being a women-led initiative of diaspora African women, and that was an amazing experience. I found women with talents who built that organization in marketing, in membership, in programs. We've been lucky to have just this amazing cadre of women. So we fulfilled our mission in Dawn, but I know that I also needed my IT friend, a guy who I reached out to only years later. I had been doing the website all by myself. I laugh now because it means that I didn't appreciate my time and my talents well enough. So outsourcing to allies is huge. And as much as we need diaspora organizations to be representative bodies of our diaspora communities, we also need to show that we understand the value of alliances and partnerships and working across different spaces. So for an organization to be sustainable, there's a lot of factors that go into play. And I will reserve those details for questions later, for your specific questions. But I just want to emphasize that don't be afraid to seek out talents that you don't have from people you don't expect. It makes you stronger. It makes the organization more efficient. And it allows fresh new blood and energy. You know, I've been a part of many diaspora organizations as a member and as a representative, where it's the same 5 people who are drained, and you are drained because no one else will do it. And there are moments, I can see moments now where we should have recruited. Now, it's a lot easier to do that today than it was 10 years ago. You have websites for people who want to volunteer for nonprofits. You have graduate school programs that have students that want to do their capstone for an organization or a small business. We have organizations and platforms like IDEA. So it's a lot easier today to seek out good talent. Don't sleep on that. Lastly, on the point of treasure, it's more than about money. It's about doing a proper appraisal of your worth and letting people know what it's worth. I was deathly afraid to put an amount on Dawn in the early days. How do I monetize Dawn? Why would I? Well, for starters, it's a nonprofit. So we're not here to make a huge salary and have very few people benefit from this. This isn't a for-profit venture. It's a community-based organization. And so I felt really uneasy with putting numbers to it. But you see, numbers are necessary. Clearly you can see that I don't like numbers or math, right? I'm a social sciences. I love words. and I love thought. But at the end of the day, whatever you're doing as an organizer, it has a business model. And I'm not saying business with a capital B. I'm saying organizational models have to be embraced, and to embrace it means you must also embrace the business side to it. Not just the legal paperwork, but the costs of doing business. When I learned how to do a cash flow statement for Dawn, I was stunned because I had to put a worth on every hour of Dawn's work. And when I learned the unit price of our programs and services, that's new to me. And so you, in dealing with your treasurer, you are learning how to maintain an organization in a sustainable way. You have to embrace the notion of programs and activities. Now, let me be clear. I'm talking about sustainable organizations. I'm talking about diaspora organizing and diaspora leadership in a sustainable, multi-year, even decades format. But if you're doing an initiative that is finite and that is in reaction or in response to an urgent issue, even that is probably more imperative that you have a sense of your treasure, your time, talent, and treasure. If you are responding to the drought that is hitting the Horn of Africa right now, that means you have to really know your numbers because you're asking people to support a finite emergency. And they're going to want to know how to help, what it looks like, and they need details. And a lot of people need details in money. I'm being blunt for this reason, for one reason. These are the things I wish someone told me, and from a diaspora space, and these are things that I wish I embraced. When you do work in your diaspora community, you don't want to think about how much money it'll take. You'll do it until it's done. You'll take 24 hours in a day, and you will work 3 jobs and be at the community center to represent and advocate for your cause. But for real change and real impact to happen, you have to have it defined, and you have to value every part of that. And putting a value on all of that starts with you. I'm gonna now, just in closing, I think this is really the important aspects around diaspora leadership, this notion of service and appreciating your role as a servant leader in your community. It's critical because that's the only way that it can be sustained and that it can be passed on. One of the hardest things about working in the diaspora communities is the minute you start something, there's this overwhelming expectation that you're just going to do it forever. And by embracing these points that I'm referring to, that I've gone over, it also creates a pathway for succession. It creates a pathway for replication. It creates a pathway for more leaders. And in diaspora communities, for some reason, many of our people, whether not just African, I'm saying this from a global space, I see a deference to diaspora leaders that is dangerous, because expecting one person or a small group of people to just sustain and carry it forward does not actually ensure that the change will happen, that you will reach your goal. You have to have turnover plans. And one of the hardest things about my experience has been that people just think I'm going to do it. And I've brought in teams, we've built amazing teams. I've brought in people and they just kind of go, oh, Semhar, whatever you want. And I said, no, this is a group thing. As a diaspora organization, we're all going to have to own this. And that means we all have to work. And that means we all have to do this this assessment of our value, of our time, our talent, and our treasure. And if you don't do that from the outset, then you're just a cog on a wheel in another organization. But if you're trying to be a diaspora leader, you've got to embrace all of these points and find a way to hand it over. No one likes to think about that. Now, I have spoken a lot about organizations and nonprofits, but I also now run a consulting firm. And my experience in the consulting world, I've consulted for many years, but I reshaped my company to be focused on diasporas and development. It's night and day. As a for-profit entity, the business and the reactions are very different. there is a value that more clients, customers, partners see. They see it right away. And if it wasn't from Semai Consulting, I don't think I would have learned all of these things that I just shared with you. I think I would do, Dawn, with so much love that I wouldn't notice all of these points. And yet, I can tell you that there are downsides to being a leader that no one prepared you for. I believe in doing what you love, but this business side, the for-profit side, has taught me the importance of appreciating our value. So there's a lot more I could share with you. But I really want to hear some of the questions you have. I'm happy to go into other areas, details around what being a leader looks like in our communities, what challenges there are to leadership. But I will turn it over now to Sarah and the team at IDEA, and we can begin the question and answer session. I'm very happy to see this many people on the conversation, and I look forward to your questions.
Semhar, thank you so much. For all the attendees, please go ahead and send your questions through the chat function. And once we receive those, we can go through and answer them one by one. And just while we're waiting for that, Semhar, I think some of the points you touched on are extremely resonant with our community. I've heard these stories over and over again. You know, our diaspora members are working full-time jobs, at least one, and then all of their diaspora work is happening on the side or at night or when they should be sleeping. And there's also a problem of not having enough support from, you know, it might be that they're the only person in the organization who really has a role that spends hours doing the work, or maybe it's hard for them to get support from their board or from other members. And so that piece about shared leadership that you were talking about, I think, is really key, as well as the one about resources and how do you ask for funding or support, especially when so many cultures don't have a culture of giving in the same way. You know, you can't ask for money for your organization, for a nonprofit. It's not as acceptable. So I don't know if there are any more sort of concrete pieces you can share with folks about how to share leadership and responsibility, how to ask for money. Maybe if you can just pick a couple of resources you found to be really helpful, or organizations or other ways you found partners to support your work. Semhar, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. So specifically, there are a number of online resources for nonprofits, or even if you're not a nonprofit yet, that help you find volunteers. And so when I discovered these websites, it changed our whole, not only composition, but our productivity. And it changed my expectations of the volunteers. So go to volunteermatch.org. Well, just look for Volunteer Match. That has been incredibly helpful for Dawn. And then Catch a Fire is another online website. Also schools, universities, colleges and universities in your respective city, they have centers and departments that probably relevant to your issue or your country. And they are, more often than not, also have career websites. So there's a website called U.Can, and it's a consortium of about, I think, 35 colleges and universities around the country that allows nonprofits to list jobs and volunteer opportunities. So I have found incredible interns from schools, either they're here in DC or they're virtual. The last website, which is also very helpful for nonprofits, is called idealist.org, and many of you are probably familiar with Idealist. But between Volunteer Match, U.Can, and Idealist, we have really diversified our teams. Now, the thing is this doesn't mean that we've been a big team. Sometimes we're as small as 2, because everyone here is a volunteer. Sometimes it feels like 1, but there's always someone with me. It's always got to happen. But teams fluctuate, and it'll be really strong and big at one point, and then it'll be really a small group and probably you on your own. But you have to be persistent, and you have to keep posting your advertisements. So Dawn has advertisements right now on Volunteer Match, on Idealist. And we have a law student, who is our fellow for the summer. I'm really grateful that people are coming forward. I think that's probably the best resources, Sarah. Oh, in terms of fundraising. So the Foundation Center is a huge institute with about 5 offices across the country. If you're based in DC, they have an office here. And you can literally research funding sources. Now, I have to be honest, being a member of the diaspora doesn't make you a fundraiser at all, especially for the points that Sarah raised. But even more importantly, fundraising is a profession. It isn't about just begging and saying, can you give me $5 or $5,000? It's a strategy, it's relationship management, it's business. And what I have found is when I found talented people who are fundraisers by profession, it took a load off of my back. And I mean, to date, Dawn still has a very minimal budget, but I now have people that I can reach out to, and they're on our board, they are volunteers, and they're called fundraising officers. They're also called development officers. Being a member of the diaspora doesn't mean that you have to do it all. And the fundraising experience has really taught me that.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's really helpful to have concrete websites that people can visit and use as resources. So thanks for sharing those. We have a number of questions now, so I'm going to try to go through and find folks and unmute them so they can ask you their question. The first one, let's see. The first one is from Stephen. Stephen, I've promoted you to a presenter, which means now you should be able to unmute your mic. And once you do that, you can, if you could just give us maybe one line about who you are and ask Semhar your question. So there's a microphone icon to the left or on the top bar there, and you should be able to click it to unmute yourself. We'll give him a sec to see if he can figure that out. Semhar, this is a privilege. It's kind of tricky, too, because we never really let people get off mute for the Q&A portion.
Yeah, no, I don't have people. And you guys are tweeting, so I'm actually checking Twitter, and this is wonderful. Thank you. Look at that. Well, I think we can also...
Yeah, let me try another person, and maybe Stephen can unmute himself in a minute when he figures it out. So, Calvin, I've promoted you to presenter. I see you've unmuted yourself. Do you want to go ahead and just tell us who you are and ask Semhar your question?
Okay, thanks. First of all, thanks for having me. I think this is a very, very important and informative meeting. My name is Calvin Bart, as stated, and I'm a founder of ADA, which is the Anguillan Diaspora Alliance. It's a main challenge. What we are now understanding and experiencing is to bringing the diaspora to our own community. We come from a very, very small island. When I say Anguilla, a lot of people compare it to Angola. It's not Angola. It's Anguilla in the Caribbean. And so what we did is trying to group the Anguillan community together, which are mostly centered in New York, New Jersey, and we have now one establishment in Miami, and we're trying to move out towards London and the UK. That's where the concentration of Anguillans are. What we're trying to do is figure out 3 projects that we're working on. One is to stimulate the diaspora tourism. Secondly is to really support a number of small schools on the island. And thirdly is, my dog is going to be crazy this moment. So those are the things, but what we're trying to do, oh my goodness.
You're very popular, Calvin. Maybe you can just...
You're exactly how we are in the diaspora, doing it always. I love it.
Okay, I'm gonna stop everything for just 1 minute. Hold on.
Okay, hopefully Calvin can take the other phone off the hook, and when he comes back, we can get the question. But I think, based on what he sent through the chat box, it looks like he's trying to find other...
So sorry for that.
Sure, but Calvin, so can you just get the question that you had for Semhar about comparable experiences and organizations? Could you pose that, please?
Yes, I
Thank you.
posted already. I posted a question online.
Okay,
So
I'm gonna, yep, I've got your question.
All
So,
attendees are muted and may unmute themselves by pressing *6.
so your main challenge is finding support in your home country
yes,
around the importance of generating diaspora tourism.
exactly.
Yeah, I think, Calvin, thank you. So basically, the diaspora experience, varies according to the relationship with our countries of origin. And a lot of times, we kind of have to help the countries understand what their populations abroad are going through. And so building that relationship takes time. In other cases, governments immediately realize the importance, or they just know that they have a huge population outside. So you are
All
experiencing
attendees are muted.
and number one, you don't know what it's like outside until you leave.
All
And so
attendees are muted and may
many
unmute themselves by pressing *6.
many
Entry
of
and exit chimes are off.
are actually, I'm sorry, I just hadn't thought. Many of our diaspora communities don't know what it's like to be, you wouldn't know what you knew until you left. Does that make sense?
Exactly.
And so what's really important is that you're able to develop a trusting relationship, not just with government. I mean, that's critical, but with communities, and having them understand that you're here to support them. And part of support, one major thing I wish I could fit in earlier, being a diaspora leader actually means listening to the communities that are affected, both in the diaspora, but more importantly, also back home. Because diaspora leaders, we step up because of our very, our prisms, right? Of what I have experienced, what people like me are experiencing. But then, the diaspora communities change, they grow, they evolve, they might shrink, but they are not all the same person. Diasporas are not monolithic, and we make the mistake oftentimes of thinking every other diaspora person has to be like us, meaning we're the same people, so we should all have the same position. This is a big challenge as diaspora leaders. Your question about how do you convince or show that you're not here to interfere, you're here to support, it's about communication, and communicating in a way that can be received. And to be honest, I like to say there's 2 ears and 2 eyes and 1 mouth for a reason. You're supposed to listen and observe more than you speak. And that means a lot to our communities and our countries. I'm happy to speak with you offline at another time. This is actually part of the work I do now in helping organizations find their roadmaps and challenges.
That's fair enough. I think that's a fair answer, and I understand exactly what you're coming from. And what I'll do, I'll post my website on the bottom. There's a lot of information there, and we just brought out a magazine, and the whole principle and the intention of what we're doing is in that magazine. So thank you very much
so much for your
response. Thank you.
Appreciate it. So Semhar, if it's okay with you, I think I'll just read the questions. There are a lot of folks who have asked questions, and I think we could get through them faster if I just read them. So forgive me, everyone, if you wanted to speak to Semhar in person. But I think it's more important that we get through what you've asked. So we have a question from Flo. He says, thanks for sharing your story. Can you speak to the conflict that exists between being a product of being bicultural, and how does that influence your voice, your approach, and your leadership style?
Thank you, Flo. I'm going to try and run through these. That's a great question. I think being bicultural is an asset. Multicultural is an asset. I mean, we talk about that in the United States, diversity, multiculturalism, inclusion. But for people who are actually carrying more than one culture in their life, who are embracing the reality of going in between, people are not going to understand it. So I talk often about this thing of code switching. My friends and I, we talk about we're natural code switchers, because I can speak Tigrinya and go to the community center, or at least I think I can speak Tigrinya, let's be honest here, but I understand it perfectly. And there are cultural cues and habits and norms that I know as an Eritrean, but there are also equally just as many as an American. And so that bicultural skills Those bicultural skills means that I can navigate these rooms. I can navigate these spaces, maybe not as authentically as someone who is entirely of one culture. It's authentic to me, but it isn't as precise, I should say. But having this ability of mannerisms and speech and communication, I think diasporas are just incredible ambassadors. And people dream of being an ambassador as a career. But the truth is, you're an ambassador the minute you go to school. You're an ambassador the minute you meet someone and they ask you, where's your family from? Now, it might annoy you, right? But you have to view it as an asset. I don't get mad when people say, are you Ethiopian? I say, no. Actually, thanks for asking, but I'm actually Eritrean. Because number one, that person tried. Even though they were wrong, they tried. But it's more important that I tell them about Eritrea. So, and I tell them in a way that makes them make them want to learn more about Eritrea. And I tell them in a way that makes them see solutions, possibilities, and diversity. So whatever community you're from, small or large, we're all ambassadors. And embracing that means taking on your strengths, your communication strengths. Thank you for your question, Flo. Sarah, I'm going to actually now also look at the questions. Stephen is asking, Stephen is asking do you think continuity is important and how can it be achieved in the diaspora organization leadership? Stephen, your question is profoundly accurate. Diaspora efforts start and stop. And they start and stop because of the reasons that we said earlier. You've got 3 jobs, you're doing a lot, life happens. What you had time for in 24 changes at 34 and 44 and onward. But what's important is in having a vision and a plan for continuity. Dawn is at 10 years next year, but it doesn't mean that we grew into like this incredible organization. We've grown into a sizable organization on the hard work of really incredible people. But what's important is that diaspora organizations are consistent, that they don't deviate from their mission, and probably at the outset that your mission and your goals are achievable and are realistic. We get tired. Every leader gets tired. Every person gets tired. And so continuity means you have to be envisioning this for one year, 3, 5, 10, and 20, to be honest. You have to envision that this is an initiative that needs to be here for 20 years. How are you going to make it to 20 years? This is for nonprofits, okay? Parashu, you've asked if any government organizations are any government organizations supporting diaspora organizations, or are there foundations supporting diaspora organizations? This is also a really great question. More and more governments around the world are appreciating and understanding the value of diasporas. And for many countries, especially countries that are donor countries, they have started providing funding for diaspora organizations. One of the strongest is the United Kingdom. The British government has actually dedicated funding to diasporas in development. There are a number of grant opportunities, of funding opportunities. And also in the same vein, the United States government has also moved ahead on funding opportunities. United States Agency for International Development, USAID.gov, has an entire section on their website for diasporas. You click on, I believe it's called Partners or Partnerships, and it breaks down, and there's a whole page on diasporas. You can go to USAID's diaspora page and explore funding opportunities, the requirements and the eligibility criteria for funding. And you can also look at some of the work that AID has been doing. I've been lucky enough to work with them as a consultant, but also as a partner through Dawn and State Department. Other US government agencies value diasporas, but in terms of funding, it largely, it's right now, a majority of it sits with USAID. In terms of foundations, more and more foundations are also valuing the role of diasporas. The Carnegie Foundation, Rockefeller are some very large foundations that have diaspora programs. They're very specific. They're largely focused on impact investing at Rockefeller, and then attracting African diaspora academics to teach on the continent, and that's from Carnegie. But we're working very hard at sensitizing the international community on the value and importance of diasporas and the fact that they need investments. So I speak often with my friends in funding institutions, friends in philanthropy, about the need for long-term investments in this new stakeholder around development and around leadership. We talk a lot about this. Okay. I'm going to go through some other questions. Sam Mikaha, you have a great question around what ways have you found effective in engaging with diaspora youth in and with the organization, especially when there's a conflict when it comes to identity? This is great. You are, over the years, I never thought I would feel this strongly about youth and next generation engagement, but diaspora organizing requires a multi-generational approach. It means you work with the community that is within the segment of the diaspora community that is within your reach, but you need a next generation component that attracts students and that will attract, high schoolers. Meaning, so much of a diaspora experience is coming to terms with your duality or your multiplicity of identity. We say intersectionality now. I feel like diasporas, we knew intersectionality, especially women, especially the underrepresented members within our diaspora community. Young people, no matter whether they're a member of the diaspora or they don't identify as a member of the diaspora, young people are searching for their identity. And what many diaspora organizations offer is a place to explore your identity. Now, it's important that more programs allow youth to explore their culture, their heritage, their language, their food. This should be done. But what's happening is diaspora organizations are working top down on, development projects. Let's say we want to build a school in our village in this country, and you need to pay, you need to fund, you need to be a part of this, young people. Well, a young person who wasn't born in that country, why would they help a school? You have to make it relevant to them. And so then programming has to target young people. An example would be a pen pal exchange program with students at the school. I think that when I was a kid, this is really unique. Eritrea was going through this war for independence from Ethiopia, or when I was growing up. And my parents used to regularly go to Eritrea during the war. And they would work with the soldiers, the workers, the women. My mother was also chairwoman of the National Union of Eritrean Women. And they would take turns tag teaming, going back to the country during the war. What happened was my dad came back one year and he said, I met this beautiful girl. She's the same age as you, but she's lost her parents. So she's an internally displaced person and she's an orphan. And I had a pen pal with this girl in the 80s. That gave me a huge sense of identity. Diaspora organizations should be doing programs that allow young people to explore their identity and learn about the country. Now, the hard part is, how do you learn about the country? It's more often than not, it becomes about politics. And that is actually one of the most combustible spaces to explore your identity. Having a sense of nationalism, having a sense of pride is one thing, but getting into issues that are inherently political can actually also influence and impact a young person's sense of self. Could be a great thing. I was exposed to politics. I have a deep sense of self, but also understanding of Eritrea. But it's not an understanding that many people would get. I'm not naive, but I'm also not as informed as someone who lives in Eritrea. But it's my exposure as a kid helped a lot. It also has helped me be balanced and thoughtful. I was lucky enough to be in a very open-minded family and that encouraged me to explore, and that's also important. I would love to talk more about youth programming in diaspora organizations. Girls need this, and young boys need this, especially if you're a Black immigrant or a brown immigrant boy. In the United States, there's issues of race, there's issues of identity, there's issues of masculinity and femininity that America in particular experiences, and it's compounded by having a diaspora experience. I mean, this is huge for me. Okay, I want to just be mindful of time. So, Sarah, I'd like to know how we are.
Yeah, I think maybe two more questions, and two that I think just from reading them might resonate with a lot of people are Margaret's question and Natasha's question. And
okay,
if you can see them,
Margaret,
hi.
Nice to see you. Margaret is president of the Young African Professionals Network, YAP. It's a tremendous space, really great organization that's been around for many years. And Margaret's question is, can you elaborate on being realistic about your time and commitment? And also, can you comment on how to gain trust and respect from your peers when you make structural changes to the organization? Yeah, I think there are tough decisions you have to make as a leader. Number one, people need to see a roadmap. And when I started Dawn, I thought I was communicating the roadmap. But when people said, where do you see Dawn in 5 years? I didn't have as good enough of an answer as I should have. And people need to see what is the end game here. And in that end game, how do you envision it growing or making an impact? You have to have those answers sussed out. And so when you make changes to an organization, that's also tough because you're really reorganizing it. And if you have a team that feels invested in the organization, then it's even more important that you communicate internally. So what I would do, if you have a strategic plan, you should rely on that as your basis, because in your strategic plan, you have change goals, you have organizational structure, and you have fundraising and programmatic definitions. If you want to make changes, it should be rooted around that strategic plan. It means maybe you have to rewrite the strategic plan, or you have to propose to your team to make these changes. If all else fails and you're looking at an organizational change out of urgency, then you have to do what has to be done as long as it's in accordance with the organization's mission and all those things. People will never like what you do. They will love it when you're doing well, and they will criticize you when you mess up. And the problem is you're not messing up. You're just making a tough call. We've experienced criticisms in Dawn because we're a member-based organization. And I believe that diaspora organizations should all be membership-based because that's where there's a fundraising pool, a monthly membership fee or an annual membership fee. But also it imparts ownership to the community. And when donors pushed back or asked questions, and they still do, I like being accountable to them. The hard part is it's really hard to be accountable to such a large network. And I wish I had more people in my zone to answer these and field these inquiries with me. I love fixing and helping our members, fixing their problems in the network. But one person, 2 people, 3 people cannot field all those questions. So in the criticisms or in the questions from members, it's made us better. And it's taught us a lot. Margaret, I think you guys are doing a tremendous job. You've done wonderful work, and I hope to continue. I hope to see your continued success. I think trust yourself, your team trusts you, and you will do the right things. There she is. You're great. Okay, last question. All right. What was the other question, Sarah?
It was Natasha's about, she's working with a Puerto Rican organization, and she said that sometimes people on the island are not receptive to the diaspora's advice and support because they left the island. And that's something that I've heard a lot from our members as well. So maybe you can address how you might deal with that.
So there's multiple stages of a country's relationship with its diaspora. And, for those that have left, they can be viewed as traitors, as you ran, you have no idea what we're experiencing, and you're just talking from the ledge. And so there's various levels of maybe anger, resentment, bitterness. And for those within the diaspora, we have to be really sensitive to that and understand. And so one approach I've really embraced is reminding myself that I'm here to listen. And even though I see some things, and I think I see some things that could be done differently or better, or I want to support you, it's also about letting the community tell me what they need, and maybe not dealing with the issue that I anticipated, that I hoped to deal with. You know, in some ways, diasporas are also interveners. We're also, in some ways, foreigners, right? We're outside. We're intervening from abroad. If you go back and forth to Puerto Rico, however, I'm sure you have relationships, and I'm sure you have conversations that you can have based on trust. I've had that in not just Eritrea, but in other countries where they see that I'm an African diaspora woman, and they go, "Why do you care so much? Why don't you butt out?" You know, they have to hear what we're going through as well. So it's a conversation. I think what the Puerto Rican diaspora has been doing to raise awareness about the country's fiscal crisis, its humanitarian emergencies, is profound. I think it's a critical role in addressing what Puerto Rico is going through and helping find solutions. And I think that it can't be understated how important that partnership is between the local communities. I know some great Puerto Ricans who are doing good work on these issues, and just like you. And so really, congratulations. It's the Paranda Puerto Rico Diaspora Network. That's great. Thank you, Natasha.
Semhar, thank you so much. I'm sorry we've run out of time, but those are really great questions from the audience. And if you didn't get something answered that's a burning question, please send it to me after the webinar, and I can help you get an answer. My email is Sarah, S-A-R-A, @diasporaalliance.org, and I'll also put that in the chat box. Semhar, I really appreciate you taking the time to do the webinar and for being so candid in sharing your experiences and advice with members. I think it's good to cut through the BS sometimes and just tell it how it is, and I really appreciate you doing that. I think everyone on the call does as well. So thank you so much, and we will make the recording available after the webinar, so everyone look in your inboxes for that.
Thank you. And Sarah, just a reminder, Sarah, for anyone who's interested in taking my diaspora leadership training, we do have a discount for everyone who's been registered on here. The next classes will be offered June 25 and 26 in Washington, D.C. You can go on my website, Semai Consulting, or semhararaia.com. And register there. It's a 2-day session, 4 parts. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, IDEA, for hosting and inviting me. And thank you, everyone, for your wonderful questions. Please email me, semhar@semaiconsulting.com. I really look forward to learning more about all of your work. Congratulations, everyone. Even in the discouragement, don't worry, you will make it. Stay focused. If you know why you're doing what you're doing, and if you take care of yourself, you can get through it.
Thank you so much, Semhar.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.